is the Revisionary Podcast with your host, Juan Carlos. The Revisionary Podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Revisionary Podcast. And I'm your host, Juan Carlos. So for those of you guys who have never heard the podcast before, the way this works is guests come on and they tell a nonfiction story about their lives in which there are certain things that they might have done a little bit different knowing what they know now. So I give them an opportunity to tell the story exactly as it happened, and then afterwards, they go ahead and tell the story and have the opportunity to change any facts or any details about the story that they please. Once that is done, we discuss the impact that the changes that they've made would have had on their lives or how it would have affected them. Today, our guest is Casey McLain. Casey is a Seattle area comic who comes to us and has a story about his wife. Now, before I call him, I don't know if that's a good idea because, he has to go home to his wife, but that's his business, right? That's not mine. So we'll see how that goes for him. He's been married for 10 years, so, I assume that at this point, they have it all worked out and he's figured it out. As a matter of fact, he's probably a good person to ask for wedding advice or marriage advice in general. So with that being said, why don't we go ahead and see if we can get Casey on the line?
Hi, Casey. How are you?
How's it going, Juan?
It's going well. How's everything going with you? What have you been up to?
Oh, I've been working on my podcast. It's called Nobody Likes Casey McLain, and it's become more of a prophecy than a podcast, I think.
So what's it actually about?
It's just interviews. It's like every other podcast. It's just I'm on like my 9th failed podcast. I'm already giving this one the failed distinction. Why? One, because when you have no listeners, it's okay to just start over.
Right.
So those are the people that don't like me or the people that don't listen to the podcast. Also, I'm doing it without a co-host because nobody likes me again, I guess. I'm not that bad, but it's mostly been me talking to comedians, about comedy. It's like every other podcast.
So is it like meant for like other comedians or like is what's your target audience?
Oh, my hope is that it's comedy fans, although I have not cracked that nut myself, so I don't know why my podcast would. Theoretically, it's like my most recent one was about, this is maybe dating this conversation, so I'm sorry if you have to edit this out, but Kevin Dombrowski is a New York comedian.
I know Kevin.
Oh, great. So he's about to have a kid. And so I have a 1-year-old and he has like a negative 2-week-year-old. Mm-hmm. So we were talking about his wife's pregnancy and the process of having a child through all of this chaos in the world.
Oh, all the fun times.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
I'm a comedian from Tacoma, Washington, which is the second biggest comedy city in the 13th biggest comedy region in this country. So pretty big deal. I've
26, right? If my math's right, 2 times 13. That's how this works.
Well, hey, this could theoretically be 14th, but I think there's probably areas like New Jersey probably has 15 areas that are bigger than Tacoma in the comedy world. So,
all right, look, Casey, if you want this to work, right? I want to like you. You can't compliment New Jersey in my presence. Like, I'm a true blue New Yorker. I'm really proud of that. And,
that was actually the point I was making, is a city or a state as bad as New Jersey has places that are bigger than Tacoma, has multiple places bigger than Tacoma for comedy.
Yeah.
I've been in the Seattle International Comedy Competition, which most Seattle comics have. It is not a big achievement. And I've been rejected by some of the most prestigious festivals in North America.
So you're exactly where you should be as a comedian.
Yeah, basically, yes. I am in that. Like, if you ever look at a bell curve and it's like, these are the insane people that go to open mics and do poetry. And then these are the people who are extremely successful. I'm in that big fat area in the middle where nobody knows who you are. Everybody remembers those insane people at their first open mics, and everybody remembers the very successful people from their first open mics, and nobody in the middle.
I remember before I started comedy, I went to a show at the Grizzly Pear. Shout out to the Grizzly Pear in New York. And I remember this guy opened by doing penguin impersonations for like a solid 90 seconds. And it was one of the funniest things I've ever seen because I was not expecting it. And I wish I could learn that guy's name because that guy's a legend.
I'm sure he's dead. I think you gained confidence to do comedy the same way I did, which is to go to an open mic and see other people bomb and be completely misunderstood, not even misunderstood, understood perfectly as lunatics by the audience. The first one I went to, a guy had lost his voice. He was sick. And so instead of talking, he did like 5 minutes of, he would act like he was about to talk into the mic, and then he'd like walk away from the mic. And it was constant like flirting with the microphone, and he never did end up talking into the mic. Billy Brazil, that's his name.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want that kind of confidence. Like I was speaking to somebody else, and they were telling me how they knew a guy who would go to the park and just stand there and not say anything for 5 minutes, and that would be a set.
Oh, yeah. That's like, I think Dave Chappelle used to do it. He used to say stuff, I think, but he would go to the park. And now that's all the comedy we have is just you have to be outdoors. Otherwise, you can't do comedy. So we're all that brave now.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I tried for a long time to start Subway comedy. I wanted that to be a thing so bad. And I remember this guy I used to do open mics with at the time. I'd be like, let's do this. And he was like, you're crazy. I don't want to do that. And now that's the thing. I was like, I'm kind of mad. Like,
it is. They're doing that now?
Huh?
They're doing that now.
Yeah, no, people, I've seen some of my fellow comedians, some of my friends would go on the subway, you know, with their hats, tell jokes, and they'd make some money off of it. I was like, I thought of that 2 years ago.
Yeah, that is good. They are the Steve Jobs to your Bill Gates, or vice versa. whoever stole from who, I don't remember.
Oh man. All I know is Bill Gates is still alive, so that's how that works. But anywho, before we get too distracted, Casey, the stage is yours. Why don't you go ahead and tell us your story?
All right. So it was 2012. I started dating my wife in 2010. And we were long distance when we first started dating. And we would say these things, these stupid things that were so naive back then. We'd say, if we lived together, that would solve all of our problems. And we moved in together in August of 2012. And let me tell you, living together did not solve any of our problems. In fact, if it did anything, it amplified our problems to a decibel level that I wasn't handling well.
Where were you living and where was she living?
She lived in Ellensburg, Washington. She was going to school at Central Washington University. And I lived in Auburn, Washington, because I had dropped out of community college and was working at a box factory while she went to college and bettered her life. And then I have slowly held it back as the years have gone on.
So, okay. So you said long distance, and for whatever reason, I was imagining like, you know, two places that were actually far, but you were within driving distance.
It was 100 miles, yeah.
Got it.
It was a deliberate trip out there every single weekend, spend the night kind of thing.
Got it. Okay. Sorry. Keep going.
But thank you for shitting on my relationship lore. The lore of my relationship has now been ruined by Juan Carlos. For years, my wife and I have been telling this story about how I trudged the distance, the 100 miles to Ellensburg every weekend, and now you're like, oh, it's nothing. Actually, could have moved further away, so the story was more romantic. So, anyways, we moved in together in Tacoma, Washington, in this apartment building. We lived on the 7th floor, and it was one of those. Let me tell you, this is like a good microcosm of my wife and my relationship at that time. We came to Tacoma and we looked at an apartment we could afford, and then we walked by some apartments that we couldn't afford, and my wife wanted to live in those instead.
Right.
And so I was the only one making any money at the time. We made it work. We just did it, right? These, if I was going to describe the apartments, it was like the difference between Seinfeld's apartment,
okay,
and the Friends apartment. Oh,
okay.
Like very, and also in cost. Which, if I would tell you the rent right now, because you're a New Yorker and you're paying 2020 rent, so you're going to laugh at this, but it was $900, which was way more than I could afford at the time. That year also happened to be the year that Western Washington had the worst ice storm we've had in my entire life. And we don't get a lot of snow here, and we especially don't get a lot of snow that stops us from driving. So if there's ever any snow on the ground, we all forget how to drive. None of us know how to drive, myself included. I'm horrible at it. So I had my car parked. I was still working at a box factory. I was working genuinely like 65 hours a week, waking up at 4 a.m. every morning, working 10s and 12s to just be able to afford this apartment. And also, food and all that other stuff. And my car, I go out to my car, and it's stuck. First off, it took me 30 minutes to just break enough ice away from the door handle to be able to even have a shot at opening the door. Then another 15 minutes to open the door. And then I tried to get it out of the parking spot it was in, couldn't even get out of the parking spot. My wife comes out. I call her. She comes out. We're looking at this situation. I'm like, you get in the driver's seat. I'll try to push the car. Can't get it out. Won't go up. It's not even a steep hill. Won't go up. Creates an enormous argument for my wife and I. Like, to that point, the biggest argument that we've ever had in our relationship. We go in. It's very cold outside. We go in. We warm up both emotionally and physically. And I decide I'm going to cook something that we both like. I'm going to fry some fish.
Okay.
I'm going to make us fried fish sandwiches. I like a deep fried meal. I don't know if you could tell that by my stature, but I like a deep fried meal, Juan
Really?
Carlos. I know
it's a celery and lettuce kind of guy.
If you bread it and deep fry it, I'll give it a shot. So I go to the store, get all the stuff for this. I fry it in. The only reason I even had a pot really to fry it in was because I brewed beer at home, that is, by the way, exactly what I look like, is someone who brews beer at home.
You know what's funny? That is the most accurate description I've ever heard in my entire life.
So I use this pot, all good. The fish comes out pretty well. Not perfect. It's very stressful. I had no thermometer, which is very stressful. We're on the 7th floor of this apartment.
Mm-hmm.
So it's also like frying fish is there's a lot of odor that comes from frying fish. It's not really meant for apartment with no balcony, 30-degree weather outside, 7th floor, the doors open into a hallway, not to the outside. It's a bad situation for the other people that live in this apartment building. So we finish, we eat this fish, we're made up, we're getting along great. I am looking at studio apartments to live in when she kicks me out. If we have our next argument on my computer at our dining table, and my wife walks in to the kitchen, and she, being a white woman in her 20s, drank a lot of tea at the time, a lot of herbal tea.
I see.
So she turns on a burner because she needs to boil some water for this tea. And she cranks it all the way up, walks out, she's watching TV. 5 or 6 minutes later, I look over and there is a wall of smoke coming out of our kitchen. I walk into our kitchen, and she had turned on the burner that had the oil.
Oh, no.
From frying fish.
No.
At full blast. She wanted to boil this oil. So smoke is pouring out. Suddenly it catches flames. Like, I'm talking, this is a 20-gallon pot made for brewing beer with not very much oil in it. And the flames are sticking out of this pot by like 3 feet.
Right.
We had a picture behind the stove. Like, what I found out was a plastic frame as it melted down the wall.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I did one smart thing. So first off, this is going to come back later. My computer is open, and I realized what's going on. I Googled how to put out a grease fire.
Smart.
And then I walk in, and this is the only smart thing I did this whole day, is I took the pot, I put it in the sink. Sounds stupid. I put it in the sink, did not put water in it, just to get it off the heat.
Right.
Because if you put water in a grease fire, it's really bad news. By the way, one of the things that my wife and I, the friction causes for us, I've made her sound bad to this point. This apartment that she wanted so bad is in a 100-year-old building. No dishwasher.
Okay.
That day, she had washed 100% of our dishes because we had used 100% of our dishes without cleaning dishes. So the dishes were all like stacked very high on the counter. So I couldn't even go ahead.
So you had 3 bowls, is what I'm getting from
No,
this.
we had an embarrassing because I had been living as an almost adult man for several years on my own.
Right.
So I had an entire adult man's worth of dishes.
Okay.
So half a set of dishes is what I'm saying. And she had a full set of dishes because she had been living on her own in a townhouse in Ellensburg. So we had 1.5 set of dishes. So I put this pot into the sink. I run out to the hallway. I grab a fire extinguisher. She's calling the maintenance guy. I bring the fire extinguisher into the kitchen. I spray it onto this flaming pot of oil. It splatters all down my arm, onto my feet. The other thing that happened, I brought up the dishes. This is why this is important. Have you ever sprayed a fire extinguisher, Juan?
No, I've never had to.
Okay. When you spray a fire extinguisher, it gets on everything within 300 yards of the spray. Okay. So my wife had washed 100% of our dishes. I am convinced that she would have rather I let the apartment building burn down than have to wash those dishes again. So by this point, smoke is filling our kitchen. Like I've never been. When I was growing up, I was scared of this movie Backdraft. Did you ever hear of the movie Backdraft?
No.
Okay, it's a movie about firefighters, and the whole thing is like a bunch of house fires, which I don't even think firefighters deal with a lot of house fires in real life. But I was always scared that I was going to like be involved in a house fire. And then I'm faced with smoke that is at eye level. It is in our apartment all the way to eye level, breathing in all this smoke, running around the fire's mostly contained. Our maintenance guy named Mike, every maintenance guy is named Mike, by the way. He's finishing up putting out the fire. I'm trying to find we have 2 cats at the time. I'm trying to find these cats. I don't even like these cats, by the way, but I'm trying to find them because my wife loves them. I'm choking. Our neighbors, who we had not met to that point, walk across and they're like, "You got to get out of here. Like, you're breathing in smoke. You need to leave. Find the cats, bring them down." We're each holding a cat. We actually, the elevator got shut down. So we're walking down the 7 floors with these cats who are traumatized. They've just been found hiding in a closet because they thought their world was ending from smoke inhalation. And we get all the way down to the ground floor. The entire building is being evacuated, by the way. We don't know any of our neighbors. Are the people across the hallway from us? And let me tell you, what I found out some years later is that guy brews beer. We had everything in common, and I still didn't even know his first name. We met because my wife set our kitchen on fire.
Clearly making a great first impression.
Incredible first impression. And then the entire building evacuates into, at this point, it's nighttime. So it was probably 15 degrees out or something like that. The entire building has to evacuate. 56 units worth of people have to evacuate onto the street where it's 15 degrees out. And they were having a good night innocently. I have burns all down my arm, on my feet. I'm carrying a cat. My wife's carrying a cat. We throw them in my wife's car, and the fire department shows up. And we're like trying to lay pretty low because we don't know anyone in the building. All they can see is on the 7th floor, there's an open window, and there's smoke pouring out of the 7th floor.
Right.
And so they're like, "What idiot lives on the 7th floor?" Loudly, as though there's no chance we could possibly hear them. They don't know it's us, but we know it's us. So we're like sheepishly, we're walking through like it's 100%. I mean, it is 100% our fault, but we couldn't have stood out more as the people that did this. So the fire department comes and they ask us like all these questions, right? You know, what caused this? Is it contained, et cetera, et cetera. They go up to our apartment, they check it out, they come down, and they're like, well, we'd like to start with, you have some fire hazards. And we're like, oh, is it the burning pot of oil? That seems like a pretty big fire hazard. And they go, well, you have piles of laundry. That's no good. Which seems just like a character insult more than they're just like, yeah, you're slobs. So, and again, at the beginning of this, it sounded like my wife is the bad guy, but I don't do dishes or laundry. So I am the monster. Trust me. You have all this. And then they go, also, did you Google how to put out a grease fire? Before or after you set a grease fire? And I was like, oh, no. And so we walk up to the apartment.
Right.
Which has now window open. It's 15 degrees in the apartment. It's so cold. We have a pile of dishes that are covered completely in fire extinguisher dust.
And clearly you don't do dishes, so it's her job, right?
It's going to be her job. Listen, I don't know how you live your relationship, but in my relationship, no, that's not true. We're very equal, but I'm not. She's better at certain things than I am.
Right.
Concentrating on those things. I do other stuff. I don't have any off the top of my head, but she's very, it's equal is what I'd like to tell you. You're listening public.
I'd like to hear it from her, and then I'll know if it's truly equal.
You'll never hear from her. So the fire department then walks around our apartment and explains all of the ways we are pieces of garbage. 15 degrees in our apartment. We go to sleep. I have to finally go to work the next morning because I had missed 3 days of work because of this ice storm. I finally go into work the next day, and I have this burn mark that makes it look like I've been freebasing and it went poorly on my arm. It's actually got almost no scars. My feet, I have to wrap a bandage around because there's burns on my feet also. And I'm doing physical labor. And I come back home the next day and I walk into our apartment and it smells like vinegar. Because apparently the best thing you can do to clean smoke off of an apartment roof is to use a mop and vinegar and just mop the ceiling all day.
Did it work?
I didn't do it. It was the maintenance guy that did it.
Oh,
yeah. It worked. It worked very well. But my wife had rewashed all of the dishes, but the counter was not available because it was going to be dripping vinegar onto so she's lined our entire living room with hundreds of dishes that she's washed again. And our apartment is 11 degrees. I'm getting frostbite. So I literally had to put on a Carhartt jacket in our apartment to make it livable. And from then on, we were just the people that set our apartment on fire.
Okay. So many layers. I have questions. First and foremost, for those of you guys listening, for all of you revisionists out there, you could not see my face, but when he was describing the apartment that smelled of vinegar mopping it on the ceiling, the face that I was giving him was one of utter disgust. You would have thought that I saw someone, I don't know, eating their own puke or something. That was the level of disgust that I felt listening to that part of the story.
Yeah. You would have thought someone was mopping your ceiling with vinegar right now.
Right now, yeah. So you walk outside, right? Obviously, no one knows that you did it. But how did they not notice, the burn marks all over you and your feet?
Well, first off, it was just on the front of my arm. And there's only one arm. And they weren't really looking at me. They were all looking up at this smoking window. And maybe they did notice. Let me tell you, Juan, my adrenaline was running pretty high. I don't think I was noticing the finer details. The fact that I had probably lost 1/2 of my lung capacity all in that one night. And I have this cat that's freaking out in my arms.
Right.
The whether people were looking at my burns, maybe they all knew. Maybe they knew and they were picking on us. I don't know.
My absolute favorite part of this story, I just want this to be apparent, is the firefighter asking you if you Googled it before or after. That is the crux of the story.
Nothing was more emasculating than that. is a real man walked me to my apartment. Like, you might as well have held my hand and walked me to my own apartment and then explained to me how little of a man I was in that moment.
So level with me, because your wife probably doesn't listen to me. I don't know. She might be a fan of my comedy. I don't know. Whose fault was it? Was it your fault or hers?
It was 100%. Well, I mean, it's shared fault because I should have taken the oil off the burner. That's
Right.
the first part, right? And I think that it's important to learn from those things. So I am a lot more careful. First off, I have a dedicated deep fryer now. I know I don't look like I would have a dedicated deep fryer. I know that I look, again, like I live a vegan lifestyle.
Clearly.
Raw vegan lifestyle. But listen, some of us have our vices. One of mine happens to be a dedicated deep fryer. So it's rare that I would leave oil on the stove anyway now. But I did make a point of not doing that after that. It's not 100% her fault, but
right.
It's like 75% her fault.
Okay, so why don't I give you an opportunity to retell this story and go ahead and change the facts to anything you want?
All right. So my wife and I attempt to push my car out of the parking spot. I don't react like an asshole. I react like a nice and caring husband.
Right.
We walk upstairs. I don't then feel guilt about the way that I've treated her. And so we eat something a little healthier, like a steak. Because my wife doesn't like steak, but if I don't feel guilty, I might feel a little more willing to buy a steak. And I go to the store, I buy a 16-ounce ribeye. I buy her chicken thighs because that's what she eats when I eat steak. By the way, I'm not coming off good in either of these stores. We have a loving relationship. We have a child together.
I'm sure. I know you have to have a loving relationship because this story happened years ago. Yeah. And somehow she's still with you. And like, I don't say somehow to be sassy. Like, I just mean like she's still with you. So
yeah, she does. She did. I told her I was going to tell this story today. And I did say when we set the kitchen on fire, and she goes, "You mean when I set the kitchen on fire?" And I promise I didn't coach her to say that.
So it's not Stockholm Syndrome.
I mean, we can't rule that out with this evidence, but the evidence isn't pointing to it presently. I would have bought a steak. I would have been healthier in my life. I'd have gone vegan way before that, not eating any deep fried foods. Were we to do fish, I would have pan-seared it instead with some asparagus, not on a sandwich, carb-free. Listen, what I'm getting at is, if I had a better diet,
right,
not only would I not have burn scars on my arm, and we got almost our whole security deposit back.
How?
I think it's just from being white. I don't think there's any other explanation. I don't know how we could have possibly. We lived there for like 7 years after that.
Right.
But I genuinely don't know how. This is what I think happened, is that same apartment about 4 months later started growing black mold from the walls. And the apartment landlord knew that was a problem.
Right.
And didn't make it clear to us that was going to be a problem. So I think the trade-off was, we not only did this guy inhale smoke, also black mold spores. So we're gonna let him. We're gonna call it a wash on the security deposit.
2 questions immediately come up.
Yeah.
The first, why does this apartment hate your lungs?
You know what's so funny is we were sick like the whole time we lived there, but it was such a cool view and a nice apartment that we just put up with it. I was just like stuffed up and my chest was congested the whole time we lived there. I'm allergic to black mold, like specifically allergic to black mold.
Well, that answers my second question. I was going to say, I don't know anything about mold. I don't know how many different types of mold there are. Is there like levels to it? Is that a worse one? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's bad marketing in 2020 to have black mold be the bad mold, I gotta say, but it is the worst. I think it is the toxic mold. Yeah.
Okay. Understood.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know where to go beyond that, because at that point we don't have a fire. Like, I'm just trying to do anything I can, unless this is like Final Destination and there was a fire coming, like a cat was gonna turn on turn off a pilot light and we were gonna explode or something like that. Every problem that I had that day could have been fixed by either completing college or or having a better diet. Because if I completed college, I'm not trying to go work at a box factory when it's 15 degrees out.
Clearly, you haven't looked at the unemployment rate for college graduates, so you might still do it with a lot more debt.
Well, I said I didn't complete college. I didn't say I didn't take on college debt.
Fair enough. So let me ask you this. Let's say the fire happens, right? Is there anything you would have done differently, post fire?
Oh, yeah, 100%. This is what I read later on when I resumed my Google search for how to put out a grease fire. Is the way you put out a grease fire is to either pour baking soda on it, which I didn't know, but I was a Boy Scout. And the other way is to cover it.
Yeah, you smell
it. It's a beer brewing pot that has a perfectly fitting lid for it that was sitting inches away because I had pulled it down from a shelf and because I'm a slob, I just set the lid off to the side. It was there, loose. And I could have put it on top of that pot and ended this fire situation with no issues, with no damage. It would have been a story. The first time I ever cooked for her, oh my God, the first 2 times I cooked for her, actually. First time, carne asada, made very badly by me, by the way. I'm just telling this story because she has a funny line in it, and I feel like I owe her a little bit of good airtime here.
Let's do it.
I cook her carne asada, and it's dry as hell.
Right.
And
you know why, right?
Huh?
You know why, right?
Uh-oh. Is it the same reason I got my security deposit back?
I mean, kind of. It's more that, when Latinos, when we cook food, we have our ancestors whispering into our ears to tell us when to stop and how to season.
Yeah, I guess that was my problem too, as my ancestors were. So I overcooked it, made it dry, followed a recipe like very loosely but poorly. And she goes, "Oh no, I really prefer my meat extremely dry," which was funny because I was like, "I'm sorry it's dry." And a very nice person that wasn't funny might have said, "Oh, it's not that dry." And she said, what is nice, but is way funnier is, "Oh no, it's really shitty, but I like it that way." And then interestingly enough, I've never actually made this connection, but the second week we were dating, we had known each other for a little while. The second week we were dating, I went on a chartered fishing trip, and basically what happened is I caught one big fish and then had seasickness the rest of the trip. But the boat caught enough fish for me to bring home a whole bunch of rockfish.
Okay.
So I was cooking us, and then I was bringing it into work also. I was frying in oil a bunch of breaded rockfish, and I caught that on fire that day. Or I made it smoke. I didn't catch it on fire.
Right.
But this is like 2 weeks into dating. I did the same thing as what would happen like 2 years later, and almost burned down our apartment building.
So never come over when you're frying fish. That's my takeaway from this story.
I've retired frying fish. I pan sear salmon now. I'm not frying any whitefish. I'll fry chicken wings, and that's it.
Okay. So really quickly, aside of the obvious, if you had changed your diet, or if you had thought to put your lid, do you think it would have how do you think it would have affected you long term?
I mean, only good. There's like maybe a butterfly effect argument you could make that like any change, like maybe this, I love my daughter, right? And maybe if my wife and I had not had this friction in our relationship that day, maybe she would have allowed us to have kids sooner because she'd be more sure that she wanted to have kids with me because I'm not a lunatic that's on fire. And so maybe we wouldn't have my daughter. So maybe that's a negative effect if you believe in that kind of thing, the butterfly effect stuff. But outside of that, I mean, it's all bad. It ruined our relationship we were too embarrassed to try to become friends with anyone in our apartment building at that point.
Right.
We're kind of antisocial people. We lived in an apartment building that has 56 units. My mom at the time lived in an apartment building that had 24 units. She had the phone numbers, I think, of 17 people that lived in her building. We didn't know the first names of anybody that lived in our building until one lady I watched her cat, and then these other people who lived across the hallway, and the guy brewed beer, and we were the exact same person. They were moving to Dubai, and we hung out with them 1 week before they moved to Dubai. And they might be dead too. I don't know. I never talked to them anymore. So
fair enough. That seems like a bummer. All right. So before I let you go, do you have any last words for our revisionaries?
Yes. Always be careful when you have oil on the stove, because you might mess around and you might burn down an entire building. We got lucky. The second I saw things on the wall on fire, I was thinking, I can't even afford to pay rent here, let alone pay to rebuild the entire building.
That's fair. Last question, and this is just how we have a tradition here, so this is how we end the podcast. Could you tell us a quick story of a happy memory, or something that fills you with joy or makes you feel warm inside from your childhood?
Yeah. Okay. My grandma has a house on Orcas Island. My grandparents, and when we were kids, this is like before my parents got divorced, which was really, those were the golden years of any kid's life, is before their parents get divorced. I don't know if are your parents divorced?
No, they're together.
Oh, okay. Well, you're really still living in the golden years. We would go to this house and pick buttercrab. We'd pick up these rocks on Orcas Island, and there'd be like 150 crab under, like little tiny crabs under these rocks. And we'd take them home, and they'd be pets for 3 days until they couldn't survive anymore because we would put them in fresh water like idiots. But yeah, that was fun. I don't know why that came to my mind. Maybe it's because of all the seafood talk. I haven't thought about that in years, but you bring out the mediocre in me.
No, that's perfectly fine. Well, thank you for coming on the Revisionary podcast, Casey, and we really appreciate your time.
The Revisionary Podcast.
I remember having a conversation with Casey once, and he mentioned how he likes to cook, but quite honestly, after hearing that story, I'm not coming over. I mean, I'm sure he's a wonderful cook or anything, but it seems to me like the one thing I really like to eat is the one thing that literally almost cost him everything he owned. So that's probably not a good mix. But I really do appreciate that Casey came on, and I appreciate all of you, as always, for listening to this episode of the podcast. Before I forget, please, please, please subscribe, rate, and follow this podcast. Make sure you don't miss a single episode, because we have a lot more good episodes that are coming through the pipelines. And as you know, before I end this thing and let you guys go, we have a tradition on this podcast where we like to highlight a charity or an organization. Usually I try to pick one that's either somehow relevant to the story or that the guest is particularly passionate about. In this case, Casey is very passionate about the Bail Project, which helps raise money for those who are incarcerated and can't afford to make bail. As always, the link will be in the description. Please and thank you for all of your support, and please continue to support any and all of the charities in any way, shape, or form that you can, even if it's just reading about them and learning a little more about them. And as always, thank you for listening to the Revisionary Podcast.
This is